Jeff, I'm not making this up. It's in the book, Honor and Betrayal. I had to write a motion on a napkin from the DFAC, the dining facility, the cafeteria. And I handed it to the judge, and I apologized to the judge. I said, Judge, I know this is unprofessional, but I got to get this pretrial motion in. I wasn't provided any paper. I tried really hard to find paper. Remember, you're like on a military base, you can't proper. So it's not like you just could run to Office Max. And I said, so I hand wrote this motion on a napkin from the DFAC. And he said, what do you mean you weren't provided paper? I'm like, the government's refusing to give us basically copiers and paper. And he lost his mind on the prosecution, rightfully so. But yeah, they got so petty that they weren't providing us paper. And of course, they didn't give us paralegal support, which is okay. I mean, we can try a case without paralegals, but any lawyer knows it's incredibly helpful to have another set of hands with you, helping you as you're getting exhibits ready and prepping witnesses, etc.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of American Potential. Now, as you grew up, did your dreams about what you wanted to be turn into reality? Well, today's guest always had an interest in becoming a lawyer or a military officer. But it wasn't until 8th grade that he discovered he could do both through the Navy's Judge Advocate General Corps, or JAG. His military journey began with a volunteer deployment to Iraq in the late 2000s. And he served there in Baghdad and prosecuted nearly 100 terrorists. He gained national attention when he defended 3 Navy SEALs wrongfully prosecuted by the Obama administration, standing firm against the Butcher of Fallujah in court. After his overseas service, he returned stateside. He launched a small business and eventually ran for office. Now, in Congress, one issue he's focused on has been energy production, a vital issue for the energy-rich state he represents. He's on the front lines, fighting to protect the energy industry from overregulation, and his commitment to defending American values runs deep. I want to welcome Congressman Guy Reschenthaler, who represents Pennsylvania's 14th Congressional District. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Jeff, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And please just call me Guy.
All right. Sounds great. Well, listen, thank you so much for being with us. And, very excited. You and I have gotten to know each other a little bit here and just real excited about having you on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's been great spending time with you this campaign season, and I appreciate you putting me on the show. Thanks for the great introduction. I'm glad you hit energy because energy is such an important issue for me in Congress, and it is an incredibly important issue for the state of Pennsylvania and, of course, the United States at large. And so often, Jeff, when we focus on energy, we make the mistake, when we focus on oil and gas, rather, we make the mistake of just focusing on energy. That's obviously part of it. But there's also a national security element to energy production, and there's also a manufacturing component of it. If you look at the national security aspect of it, it's not a surprise that Putin got Western Europe hooked on his oil, and then the Biden administration killed the Keystone XL pipeline. Literally day number 1 of the Biden administration, they did that, and then approved Nord Stream 2, which allowed Russia to pump petroleum into Western Europe. So he destroys greatly limits our energy production, allows Putin to pump energy into Europe. Putin gets Europe dependent basically on his oil and gas, and then invades Ukraine because he has all the leverage. So I tell everybody, what we should be doing is we should be expanding our LNG exports in particular, but all our energy exports, because that strengthens us on the international stage. It also weakens our adversaries like Venezuela and Russia and Iran. And then, Jeff, if I can just go on, there's a manufacturing aspect to energy production too. Too often we just focus on energy, but we forget you need petrochemicals for everything with advanced manufacturing. I mean, you can't make a pair of glasses to a jet fighter without petrochemicals. So if you could see the entire argument and say, okay, we can have all the energy production we want from wind and solar. I don't think that's feasible, but let's just see the argument. Okay, you still need petroleum products for manufacturing because you need the petrochemicals. And I'm talking everything from cement to pharmaceuticals, clothing items. I mean, like everything that's in the manufacturing pipeline, you need that. And then lastly, if you have cheap and abundant energy, you also reduce the price of manufacturing, because as those energy costs come down, it's cheaper to manufacture, and that will make us more competitive with China. China, of course, bringing one coal plant online about every week.
Yeah, it truly is a national security issue. It's an economic issue. Anybody who's bought a new set of tires over the last couple of years realizes that the first of all, petroleum products or so much of this, the price of these things are driven by bad government policies on energy, and we can do better. We're America, of course, we can do better. And of course, you come from the great state of Pennsylvania. So much energy production there. I know it's a jobs issue to you and to your state as well.
It's absolutely a jobs issue. And if you look at Pennsylvania, some estimate that Pennsylvania has more natural gas than Saudi Arabia has oil. I mean, we are truly a state among nations when it comes to energy production. And this also drives the economy with jobs. I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs in Pennsylvania directly tied to the oil and gas industry and also the supporting industries, the supporting businesses around the industry. And then to get back to manufacturing, it's incredibly important that we have cheap and abundant petrochemicals, which will go directly into our manufacturing here, which will reduce costs as well. So you can't really overstate the importance of natural gas in the state of Pennsylvania. It's our lifeblood here.
Okay, now, a lot of times when kids are growing up, they want to be, in the NFL or a hockey player in the NHL or whatever. Sounds like maybe you wanted to do those things too, right? But sounds like you wanted to be a lawyer or a military officer. When you were growing up, what made you kind of drawn to those?
I've always been interested in military service ever since I was a little kid. I'm not sure exactly what drew me into it, but I'm sure A Few Good Men and Top Gun had something to do with me wanting to join the Navy. That's for sure. But I was in a dilemma when I was in middle school because I really wanted to be a military officer and I really wanted to be a lawyer. It was like this dilemma, and I was really struggling with it. Fast forward, I'm going into 8th grade. I'm on summer vacation right before going into 8th grade. We're having lunch with my dad's best friend, who just happened to be a former JAG turned assistant U.S. attorney in Charleston, South Carolina. And he asked me, as grown-ups ask young kids all the time, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I shared with him this dilemma. And he goes, you can do both. And I'm like, how can I do both? And he explained to me that he was a JAG. He started talking about the cases that he had prosecuted, the experiences he had. And I just remember saying, okay, that's what I want to do. So I went into 8th grade knowing I wanted to be a Navy JAG, went into law school expressly saying I'm going to law school just to be a Navy JAG. So, I'm one of the few people that got to do exactly what he wanted to do when he was younger and became an adult. So I'm very fortunate for that opportunity.
Yeah, it's very unusual. But you volunteered to go to Iraq. Why'd you want to go serve in Iraq?
I just really believed in the mission in Iraq. I mean, at the time, we've got to remember, I was in college when 9/11 happened. I was a freshman. The global war on terrorism was something I was really invested in. And I really thought that we had a chance in Iraq to just really change the landscape in the Middle East. In retrospect, things did not work out as they should have. And I could talk about that. But at the time in 2008, 2009, I was really gung-ho, wanted to go to Iraq, volunteered to deploy. And I got the best assignment, in my opinion, that I could get as a lawyer in Iraq. I was in Baghdad at Forward Operating Base, FOB Union 3, for anybody that served. It's right across from the U.S. Embassy. But we were prosecuting terrorists and insurgents in the Iraqi court system, using Iraqi law in front of Iraqi judges, using an interpreter. It was just an amazing experience. And I got to prosecute some really bad actors. I prosecuted just under 100 terrorists. I had well over 90 convictions. I think it was like 96, 97 convictions. Had 13 death penalty convictions. We called them death penalty detention orders. Did that and had a death penalty on the leader of Hamas in Iraq. So it was an amazing experience for not only a young lawyer, but a young JAG. And then that was in 2009. I went back to Norfolk, Virginia, and I was almost immediately assigned a case with a Navy SEAL who was falsely accused of punching the Butcher of Fallujah in the face. It absolutely didn't happen. We had literally a team of Navy SEALs on SEAL Team 10 saying that this didn't occur. We had a master of arms who had some issues, to put it mildly, and a terrorist, the Butcher of Fallujah, saying that he had been punched by the Navy SEALs. The Obama administration, despite all the evidence, took the word of the terrorist over the word of an entire SEAL team, and they charged, I think, 8 SEALs total. They tried 3. My client was the first off. He was the lead petty officer. He's the first one that was tried. I got to cross-examine the Butcher of Fallujah in court, showed that he was lying, basically impeached him the entire time he was on the stand. The government's case fell apart. My client, the Navy SEAL, was fully acquitted. And then I was a consultant for the next 2 SEALs that were tried just for the cross-examination of the terrorists. And they, of course, were acquitted. So it was an excellent experience as a military attorney.
Let's talk about that. So people maybe don't remember who the Butcher of Fallujah was. Yeah. Maybe give some background to him, and then I want to get a little bit more into that case with you.
Yeah, the Butcher of Fallujah, Ahmed Hashim Abdel Asawi, I believe is his real name, but he was known as the Butcher of Fallujah. What he did, he was like 2 or 3 in Al Qaeda in the early 2000s. So remember, we went into Iraq in 2003. There was the Battle of Fallujah, and at some point in that period, he had either killed or got the bodies of military contractors. Almost all were former Navy SEALs. And he burned the bodies and displayed them from a bridge in Fallujah. It's iconic photos of the horror of that time period in Iraq. And the Butcher of Fallujah, after that, became one of the most wanted, if not the most wanted terrorists in Iraq. SEAL Team 10 in 2009, I was deployed at the same time, but I was not at all attached to a SEAL team. I was prosecuting terrorists in Baghdad. But they had captured the Butcher of Fallujah. We had GoPro cam showing that they were very generous with him, allowed him to say goodbye to his family, took him on a helicopter, and then brought him to the forward operating base where they were stationed. They then put him in a detention container. Basically, they put him in a Connex box, like a shipping container, which is very common, until they handed him over to the Iraqi authorities. That night, I believe, the Butcher of Fallujah self-inflicted wounds upon himself. They're trained to do that. The terrorists are trained to do that, to self-inflict wounds and then blame it on the Americans, because they know that our legal court system will grind the mission to a halt and put the careers of the Navy SEALs and other operatives in danger. So he followed the playbook, self-injured, and we were able to bring in an oral surgeon actually in court to testify that it's, in his expert opinion, the wounds that the terrorists received were self-inflicted. And we were able to match that up with the training that the terrorists received. And then, of course, the impeachment on the stand of the terrorists just broke the government's case apart.
Yeah. What, did you catch him in lies on the stand?
Several times. So I got to talk to the terrorists before the trial started. And I was able to, when I was deployed in Iraq, I was able to pick up some Arabic. I'm not proficient at all. I don't want to overstate this, but it really gave me the ability to understand how the terrorists was going to act in court, what they were going to think was going to happen, because I knew their military, or I knew their court system so well. Even though we were in military court, I kind of knew what he was expecting. So I got the terrorists just to talk, and I had him commit to these lies. So when he was on the witness stand, he had told me when I was talking to him before trial that, for example, he was kicked with steel-toed boots. Very important, because we had testimony that the Navy SEALs, as soon as they were done with the mission, they all put on flip-flops. They're all college wrestlers and swimmers. I mean, they want to be in flip-flops. That's just how they are when they're not on a mission. So the steel-toe boots was really important, because that clearly did not match the evidence. He said he was spitting up blood for days. I had pictures to show his torso. There was no wounds on his torso. We had a medical examination saying there was nothing like him spitting up blood. He had said that he was having jaw problems where he still couldn't chew food. We had obviously oral surgeon that was testifying that was not the case at all. He also was caught with a couple $1,000s. I forget just how much, but they were consecutively marked $100 bills, which of course is counterfeit money. You can't have counterfeit $100 bills of US dollars consecutively marked. He told me that those were from his mother selling jewelry over a period of years to pay for him to go to the pilgrimage, the Hajj. And so when I asked him on the stand, I said, how'd you get these thousands of dollars of $100 US bills? And he said, oh, my mom collected them, selling jewelry for years. And I just said, why do you think it's consecutively marked? And he said, Inshallah, God willing. And I think that's when he realized that he was in trouble, because we were exposing all of his lies on the stand, and of course blowing his entire credibility. And the government was really hanging the entire case on the Butcher of Fallujah, which is just crazy to think about, Jeff. Just take a step back. How would you like to be the U.S. Navy prosecutor, and your entire case hinges on the Butcher of Fallujah, the number 2 or 3 most wanted terrorist at the time? And you're taking this guy's word against all the SEALs, but they were really focusing on the Navy SEALs testimony, and then also a master at arms. It's like military police in the Navy. And this guy had some serious psychological problems. He was having emotional breakdowns. Not exactly the best witness you would want to put on the stand, but they took these 2 characters, put their stories on the stand, and they thought they were going to get convictions. It was quite remarkable. There's a book written about it called Honor and Betrayal by Patrick Robinson. Great book. The first half of the book focuses on the actual capture of the Butcher of Fallujah, and then the second half is the 3 courts martial that took place afterward. Self-serving because I'm in the book, but it is a phenomenal read for anybody interested in military justice or the war on terror, or just military law in general. It's a great read.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. You prosecuted this under the court-martial system, correct? So he had a right to did he have a right to an attorney, I assume, or
well,
not? Go ahead.
Well, so I prosecuted in the Central Criminal Court of Iraq, and that was the Iraqi court system, and they do have the right to an attorney, and an attorney would be provided for them. Their legal court system is actually pretty Western. It's the most Western court system in the Middle East, except for Israel. But as far as all the Arab states, it's probably the most Western court system. Now, when I went back to defend the Navy SEAL, I didn't prosecute. I'm sorry. When I went to defend the Navy SEAL, I did that. The terrorist was a victim in that case, or at least that was the government's theory. He did not have access to an attorney. Really, in theory, the prosecutors were really the ones handling him. But then the Butcher of Fallujah was then later tried in, I believe, at the Central Criminal Court of Iraq. I'd have to go back and look at that. And in that case, other Navy JAGs prosecuted him, and he was defended. Probably either Al-Qaeda paid, he was so high up, Al-Qaeda probably paid for a defense attorney, or he had a public defender attached to him. But he was ultimately prosecuted and convicted, and I believe given the death penalty shortly after the appeals process ran its course. But I did not, but I want to be clear, I cross-examined the Butcher in court. I didn't prosecute him. I had prosecuted the terrorist when I was in the Central Criminal Court of Iraq.
Right. So when you were in the Central Criminal Court of Iraq, I was just kind of fascinating. Anybody who knows anything about law knows, you have to be barred in a state to practice and things like that. Yeah. How did they get you up to speed on the Iraqi court system? Did you all have to take courses in that, or how'd that work?
You did. We went to Naval Justice School, which is in Newport, Rhode Island. It's right where the Naval War College is. And we did, I forget if it was a week or 2 weeks, but it was basically a crash course in Iraqi law, their culture, their courtroom procedures. And really it got us up on our feet pretty quickly. But the Iraqi court system, the statutes read much like our statutes, because the Brits were there for so long. There were a lot of British influence, and of course we're a British common law system in the United States. The difference with their court system, though, wasn't statutory, and the criminal procedure is pretty close to ours. The difference was they are in what's called an inquisitorial system. That's much like continental Europe. So you don't have a jury system. You have a judge that's really the motor behind the cases. Where in the United States, in the British system, the common law system, the judge is supposed to be a neutral arbiter, and then you have the prosecutor as really the engine of the case and sparring with the defense attorney, and the jury, or if the judge is the fact finder in the case, is the ultimate determiner of guilt or innocence. In their system, the judge is kind of like a super judge. He's really leading the investigation. He can call witnesses, pretty much calls all the witnesses, and he's got investigators that are like his law clerks. And then you're still prosecuting the case, but you're there representing the. If you're prosecuting, they're really representing the victim. So we were representing the members of the coalition forces that had been killed in IEDs or other instances against the terrorists. you're still cross-examining witnesses. You're still giving opening and closing statements, just like in our court system, but it's a little bit different just because there's no jury and really the judge is the driving force.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. I mean, there are terrorists in prison today and some who are put to death because of your work in that legal system. I mean, that's pretty fascinating. I'm sure you're very proud of that.
It is, it's so rewarding, and I'm just glad that I had the opportunity to do that. But everybody always asks me, they say, "Are you more proud of the death penalty convictions you got in the 13 I got when I was deployed, or were you more proud of the full acquittal you got for the Navy SEAL?" I got to be honest, I'm more proud of the acquittal of the Navy SEAL because the Obama administration was going after this guy. He was innocent as could be, and you took a true warrior off the battlefield and put him through absolute hell for about a year until he was fully acquitted and restored with what he should have been restored with. So for me, that's actually my proudest achievement as a lawyer was that acquittal.
Yeah, as you and I were talking about that case the other day, I remembered it. It brought back a memory of that case. Let's talk about that with the Obama administration's decision to prosecute. I mean, what was the impetus behind that?
Well, I think, this sounds cliche, but I really think it's the blame America first crowd.
Right.
And at that time, there was a lot of complaints about how detainees were basically terrorists that were in our custody were being handled. You had Abu Ghraib, of course, a few years before.
Right.
And I feel like the Obama administration was going out of their way to show the world that we had the moral high ground, that we valued the rule of law. And look, you can make arguments for that. I think that there's something to be said, but they were salivating to get a conviction on the Navy SEALs. They just were. And the way the defense team was treated relative to the prosecution team just shows you that they were trying to stack the deck the entire time. I don't want to get into too many details because I don't want to bore people, but we wrote a motion to basically compel. The government was trying to try the case in Norfolk, Virginia, which is where the SEAL Team 10 is based, right outside of Little Creek. Little Creek is right outside. That's where they're based. So they were trying to try the case at Norfolk. We wrote a motion to compel production of the witness because going back to the days of 1500 England, you have the right to confront your accuser. So we wanted to make sure that we produced the terrorist. He came on U.S. soil, so we could cross-examine the terrorist in front of the jury. We know there was no way the government was ever going to take the terrorist out of Baghdad and bring him to the United States because he'd be tied up in court for years because at that point, the full protections of the Constitution applies to him. And you have that, which is, as you're seeing with the Gitmo case, is an absolute mess. Those terrorists are still in the court system. So we won the motion to compel the witness. We thought it was game over. The government was so adamant about getting convictions on the SEALs, they moved the venue of the case to U.S. federal court on Camp Cropper in Baghdad, which is a U.S. military base in Baghdad. I mean, just show it costs, I forget the total amount, but I mean, you're talking, it's probably in the hundreds of thousands of dollars if you added up the transportation costs, everything associated with that case to move the case from Norfolk, Virginia to Baghdad. But they were adamant. And then when we got over there, they wouldn't provide us paralegals. Although they had tons of paralegals, they had this huge workroom, this huge prep room. They put us in basically a closet. And you got to remember, there's 3 prosecutors, but you had like 9 defense attorneys because every Navy SEAL had 2 or 3 attorneys. And so the defense team's huge. And they're giving us this. They wouldn't even give me paper. I had to, Jeff, I'm not making this up. It's in the book, Honor and Betrayal. I had to write a motion on a napkin from the DFAC, the dining facility, the cafeteria. And I handed it to the judge, and I apologized to the judge. I said, "Judge, I know this is unprofessional, but I got to get this pretrial motion in." I wasn't provided any paper. I tried really hard to find paper. Remember, you're like on a military base at Camp Cropper. Yeah. So it's not like you just could run to Office Max. And I said, so I hand wrote this motion on a napkin from the DFAC. And he said, "What do you mean you weren't provided paper?" I'm like, "The government's refusing to give us basic copiers and paper." And he lost his mind on the prosecution, rightfully so. But yeah, they got so petty that they weren't providing us paper. And of course they didn't give us paralegal support, which is okay. I mean, we can try a case
Yeah.
without paralegals, but any lawyer knows it's incredibly helpful to have another set of hands with you, helping you as you're getting exhibits ready and prepping witnesses, et cetera.
Sure. And the jury saw through this, right? They saw through, I mean, in your mind, you were there. How did the jury come to the conclusion that they did on the acquittal?
Yeah. Well, I think the jury definitely picked up the fact that the government, we often think that the prosecutors were just reluctantly prosecuting these cases and they were just doing their job because they were assigned these cases. That's total BS. If you read their body language, their demeanor in the courtroom, they were hell bent. They were bloodthirsty to get to convictions on all these seals. They thought it was going to be a big career maker for them. I don't know their political leanings, but they definitely thought that for career advancement, they were going to get convictions. They were going to be these big heroes in the JAG Corps. So they were really going over and above where they should have been and getting very emotionally attached to the case. I think the jurors saw that and they just saw how petty and frankly vindictive they were becoming. And how they were treating the witnesses on that. Because remember, most of the witnesses were Navy SEALs, or there were people attached to the SEAL team, which, and this is another important thing to remember, in the military court system, your jurors are not citizens. They're citizens, but they're military service members.
Absolutely.
And so it's a big deal when you have, guys that are there in fatigues on the jury panel. We call it jury panel in the military, but when they're in the jury and they're sitting there in fatigues and they're looking at you and they're dealing with detainee operations, they're dealing with having to go outside the wire and going into the red zone, et cetera. So they were already predisposed to siding with the Navy SEALs because they were there on mission to go after terrorists. So we had a leg up, but they were able to easily see through what the government was trying to do. Then again, the cross-examination just totally blew the case apart.
Yeah. Well, thank God that you won that. You won that case. There was the acquittal. I mean, that would that would forever change our military, frankly, if you hadn't. And I'm sure that was in the back of your minds.
But, I think that we need to really look at how we're treating the special operators in the field.
Yeah.
Those split second, and look, I never fired a shot in anger. I was a staff officer. I was a Navy JAG my entire time in the military. I can only imagine what the special operators are going through when you're breaching a door, when you're going in, when you're deciding if you have to shoot or not shoot in a split second. It's difficult enough to do that. But imagine knowing that you have the Obama administration that is just salivating to get a conviction on a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret, what have you. And then you have that running through your mind. We can go through tons of cases. You saw what happened to Gallagher. He was a Navy SEAL that ran afoul of the law. I worked to try to help him out too as a congressman, not as a Navy JAG. You also had the case with the Luttrells. With Marcus Luttrell, where they had to make a split second decision. They made a decision and literally everybody died except Marcus. So that is definitely impacting the special forces for sure. And I also think we need to look at our rules of engagement. When we go to war, we should go to war to win the war. And I understand that we have to respect civilians. You want to make sure that you have allies when you leave. But I would argue that if we had the same rules of engagement and the same kind of military, the military court system that is going after the war fighters that we have now in World War II, we may not have won World War II. I mean, you could not have firebombed Japan, for example. We know prisoners weren't being taken on D-Day, for example. That could have changed. So, I mean, I'm not a military historian, but I can tell you that the rules of engagement now, I think, are far too restrictive and put the lives of our warfighters in danger and ultimately impedes our ability to wage war.
Right. Well, after you came back home, you decided to run for office. Why was it important to you to continue serving your country? And how do you view that service now in relation to what you did in the military?
Yeah, so I thought I would get into politics later in life. I never thought I'd get in when I was younger. And I got out of the Navy, and I remember I was at a big multi-state law firm doing civil litigation, and I had won a case on a motion, and it was a big deal. And I was so used to having the sailor or the Marine's parents like buying pizza, the Marine giving you a big hug or whatever. Like you had gratification, you had satisfaction because there was gratitude from an actual person. And that didn't happen in this case, nor should have it had happened. It was a big corporation. I don't know what I was expecting. And I realized right in that moment, I don't feel like I'm serving anybody. I think that anybody could be doing this. And I really feel like I need to give back and get more of a personal connection. Right around the same time that happened, I was approached to run for district judge, magisterial district judge. And I was 29 at the time. Both my opponents were twice my age. Didn't really think I would have a shot, but I was like, you know what, let's give this a go, see how it plays out. And I just worked my tail off. I was very methodical. We ran the campaign, I think, at a level that was beyond a magisterial district judge race in terms of sophistication and organization. And we end up in Pennsylvania, you could run on both tickets for magisterial district judge position. I won on both the Republican and Democratic ticket in a three-way race by over 50%, meaning that in the fall election, I was running against myself. I was both a Republican and a Democrat running. So we smoked it. And then got on the bench. And I thought at that point, I was going to stay on the bench forever and maybe run to be Superior Court judge or Commonwealth judge and just move up in the judicial system. And then I was getting really frustrated because truancy was not being addressed, I thought, properly. And truancy is incredibly important. It's overlooked. But the kids that are truant are the kids that need to be in school the most. And there's such strong correlation between truancy and future for low wage earning, the inability to earn a livable wage, crime rates and imprisonment. So we know that we can get these kids in school, it can change the trajectory of their lives. And I instituted a program in my court with the approval of the president and judge of the county and working with the school districts. And we took the recidivism rate of truancy, which was very high before, and we plummeted it. I think it went down to, below 20%, just in a few months. And so I took a moment. I said, I also was really upset about the way oil and gas development was being treated in Western Pennsylvania, because I felt like if we had oil and gas production, we may not need to be involved in foreign wars, for example. So I had these two they weren't competing. They were just two sentiments, and I couldn't do anything as a judge. I felt like I could help people every single day as individuals as a judge, but I couldn't make systemic changes. So the opportunity came. My state senator resigned. He was a Democrat. It was a D2 or D1 seat. And I resigned from being a judge. I ran for state senate. Everybody thought I was crazy, because typically in Pennsylvania, you leave the state house or the state senate and you run to be a district judge. I did it in reverse. And especially for a seat that I was not guaranteed to win. It was a long shot. And I ended up winning by over 10 points, despite the fact that the Democrats spent something like $1.3 million against me just in negative ads. So it was a wild race. Ended up winning. And it wasn't my bill, but there was a truancy bill that was coming through the Senate at the time. And I was able to put a lot of my language from what I did when I was in the court system into the bill. And we tweaked truancy. So right away, I got a big win. And then going back to oil and gas, I was able to get some deregulation of the industry, which I think greatly helped. We didn't do enough. I wish there's other things we would have accomplished, but what we did, I think, was really necessary. And then I started exploring other areas too. I did animal welfare. I felt like we needed to increase crime penalties and fines for people that abuse and mistreat animals. So we got that through. And then I did a big victims' rights constitutional amendment called Marcy's Law to give victims of crime constitutionally protected rights in the court system. Completely necessary. There's a big movement that's called Marcy's Law, and got that passed through constitutional amendment. Did some banking insurance deregulation. So I was between criminal justice reform, deregulation, animal welfare. I was all over the place just because I like passing bills. I just like getting stuff done. And then the chance to run for Congress occurred. A much better Republican seat than a swing seat in the state Senate. Ran for that, and immediately found out that in Congress you're siloed. So you basically you're a creature of your committee. And I knew after my first term I was on foreign affairs and judiciary, which was great because I got to do the Trump impeachment, which was unfortunate for the country, but as a freshman congressman, it was incredible being there for the impeachment, dealing with all that, the Mueller investigation, all that. But I realized that if I wanted to have a broad legislative portfolio in Congress like I did in the state Senate, I had to be either on the Rules Committee, which every bill that comes to the floor of consequence comes with a rule, and that you decide what amendments are allowed on and if amendments can be put on. So you basically can touch every piece of legislation. So I needed to be on either rules or appropriations because everything needs funded. If you authorize it, it still needs funded. So I asked Kevin McCarthy, who at that time had become my big political mentor. I asked him to be on one of the two committees, and Kevin, being Kevin, put me on both. And I'm still on rules and appropriations to this day.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. And I mean, you sort of answered this, but I guess I'll ask it. How's your experience influence your approach? Like, the experience of being an attorney, also being, in the JAG, but then the prosecutions and all of that. How's that influenced your approach to defending Americans' freedoms in Congress?
Well, it's greatly impacted me. And to get back to the other question you had asked about service, I really view political service as a continuation of my service in the Navy, because I still feel like I'm fighting for the United States and our values and making sure that the United States remains powerful abroad and economically and all that. So I really, in my mind, I just view that I'm serving, only instead of wearing dress whites, I'm in a navy blue suit. And instead of being on a Navy base, I'm in Washington, D.C. So I take the service very seriously as part of the job. But I feel like the military experience, particularly that cross-examination and direct examinations in the courtroom as a military trial attorney, really gives me a leg up. Especially on the Rules Committee, because you're dealing with usually committee chairmen or ranking members, very savvy, sophisticated members of Congress who've been around for a while, and to be able to cross-examine them, do it in a professional manner, showing hypocrisy, or giving what I would consider a direct examination of one of our chairmen on our committee to make sure that we're getting out our point of view and our positions in a thoughtful, articulate manner, I think is very important and very helpful. I've had some great interactions with. I had a great back and forth with Mueller. I had numerous great back and forth with Chairman and now Ranking Member Jerry Nadler. So it's really given me a chance to really show that I still have those courtroom skills that really helped when I was in the Navy. I'm just now using them in committee hearings, not in a court of law.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, Guy, thanks for joining us. I appreciate the story. What an amazing career you've already had. I mean, you must feel really blessed to have been able to do all of these things and really be a part of history.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I'm just really, really fortunate. And sometimes I got to just pinch myself just because, I got to do everything I wanted to do when I was younger. So it's great. And then just serving the country in whatever capacity, it's an honor and a privilege. And I'm very fortunate. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, thanks for joining us. Thanks for telling the story. And this is one of those great examples of, so many people who serve in the military go on to continue to serve our country, whether it's in Congress or through the court system or in the administration. But so many people take that service and then continue it even after they're either out of the military or no longer active duty. And you see that constantly. And that's one of the great things that just really highlights the greatness of America and who we are as a people. Listen, if you'd like to get connected with Americans for Prosperity State Chapter, be sure to email me at jeff@americanpotential.com. And we're always looking for stories out there, stories like the congressman's, to help keep you inspired and informed. And the best way to stay connected is by liking and subscribing to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube. Look, we got to go out there and defend liberty and freedom. That's what it's all about. Go out there and do that. Thanks for joining us on another edition of American Potential.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.